Hello and welcome back to my How to Build a Megabase series. Today we'll continue with the next logical step after gaining access to our first legendary quality modules. If you are interested in how this particular design works, you can check out the previous video. But just as a quick reminder, this compact design here produces roughly 26 legendary quality modules per hour, which is enough to jumpstart today's endeavor. Now that we have our first legendary quality modules, the question is, how can we put them to best use? Remember that we have just started producing them and at a very low rate, so we can't just spend them like crazy. In fact, we should spend them on something that will help us save on these modules in the future. For example, this design right here uses a total of 104 legendary quality modules, which is a lot. By the end of this video, we will be able to reclaim 40 of those, while still improving its production rate. So have you guessed already what's up next? Well, today we will produce two things at once: legendary electromagnetic plants, or EMPs, and legendary Holmium. For this, we will need to wait for a total of 24 legendary quality modules, then take them with us and head over to Fulgora. But before we start with today's build, let me explain the reasoning behind this step. Within the megabasing community, it is generally accepted that Fulgora is the hardest planet to scale up, mostly because of handling all the scrap products. Believe it or not, it is way worse than Leber. But also way before we get into megabasing territory, Fulgora is very challenging. Therefore, I assume that at this point in the playthrough, at least in mine, the planet would probably be barely functional. It would be somewhat stable, but with very low production rate of both raw Holmium ore and the resulting electromagnetic science packs. If I can get my hands on some early legendary EMPs, would this not only speed up my transition into a megabase, but it would also directly help scale up science production on Fulgora itself. Legendary Holmium is also quite valuable at this early point in time. We will soon need it for a lot of very useful legendary items, for example, cryogenic plants, mech armor, personal roboports, Tesla turrets, railguns, fusion reactors. And remember, we can turn 100 legendary Holmium plates into 825 legendary quality modules if we can get our hands onto the other ingredients, of course. So the sooner we start stockpiling legendary Holmium, the easier it will be later. Today's design will be able to produce up to 13 legendary EMPs and up to 500 legendary Holmium plates per hour. But in a real playthrough, we will most probably not reach these numbers right away, because our early Fulgora base won't be able to keep up with the resource demand. Which is another reason for me to proceed with this step now and not later. Given that the existing scrap processing rate on Fulgora is very low, it will take even longer to get legendary EMPs and Holmium. So we should also use this step as an opportunity to slightly scale up our production on Fulgora. Perhaps add some more scrap miners, add more scrap recyclers, or finish some scrap recycling productivity researches. Just squeeze out a little bit more Holmium ore. Now let's start with today's gambling design. It will be very basic and effective, and I will use variations of this design for many items later on. It is in fact my number one design choice with regards to quality gambling. We start by putting down a row of 5 EMPs and set recipes for all 5 qualities of EMPs, from normal quality all the way up to legendary quality. The lower 4 EMPs will each get 5 legendary quality modules. The final EMP can get some efficiency modules. Next, let's add the output inserters with a memory cell. This combinator will store the number of all qualities and quantities of items that were produced by each machine. It's completely optional, but I really like to have this in my designs. The output lands on a belt and is transported down. Let's put a recycler here and add our final 4 quality modules. Next, we add an inserter here. Of course, we want to make sure to only recycle non-legendary EMPs. So I set a filter condition to not pick up legendary items. Instead, I add a second inserter and a yellow storage chest to pick up and store all the legendary EMPs. But right now, we might still need some non-legendary EMPs for other builds, so it is helpful to add a small buffer for those as well. I simply add a yellow chest here, set its logistic filter and add an inserter. The inserter will need to filter for normal quality. I set the stack size to 1 and connect it to the logistic network to define the number of normal quality EMPs I want to keep in stock. Let's say 5, because this is the capacity for a single rocket. I also add a second inserter that will directly feed from this chest into the recycler. For this I set the logistic condition to only be active if there are more than 5 EMPs in the network. This will automatically recycle any excess number of EMPs. Now let's handle the recycler's output. The recycler will produce 75 items at once. It's therefore best to have it dumped directly into a chest, so it is empty immediately and can recycle the next item without delay. We can use a stack inserter here to then put all the items onto a belt. In order for the stack inserter to not get stuck, we connect it with a green wire to the chest and set its mode to Set Request. This way it will dump everything onto the belt in stacks of up to 4 items and not get stuck. Now we need to sort and route all the different qualities of items to their respective machines. But before that, we need to also think about the additional inputs that we need for the normal quality production machine. There are 2 different ways we can approach the inputs, or a mix of both. One method would be to request them via robots. So let's start with that and add blue requester chests. I prefer 1 chest for each ingredient, although it should also work if you just use 1. Let's request 200 steel at the bottom. I will, however, disable the requests for now, because I will use the other input method in this tutorial. Let's request 200 blue chips next, then 200 holmium plates, and finally 200 refined concrete. Now let's add input inserters. One very helpful addition here is to add a logistic condition to the inserter that will insert the blue chips. Only activate if there are at least 1000 blue chips available in the network. Otherwise you will very soon no longer be able to launch rockets into space, because this machine is very hungry for blue chips. If needed, you can also add a similar condition to the inserter for the holmium plates. Next, let's route the normal quality materials we got from recycling into these chests. We first need 1 splitter to filter all normal quality items to the left. Then we add 3 more splitters. This first splitter will filter steel to the left. I set the quality filter to any because I want to copy and reuse the splitters for the other machines as well. Next, I add a splitter for the blue chips and finally 1 for the holmium plates. The refined concrete will then automatically end up at the very top. But before we hook this up, let's implement the second method for the inputs. Depending on your type of Fulgora base, you might want to belt the items in and not use robots. You can of course mix both methods and request, for example, 2 of the items via robots and belt in the other 2. For this tutorial, however, I want to use belts. I already prepared some input belts over here. Just imagine these belts are spaghettied in from all over the place. If I connect this topmost input belt for refined concrete, I want to make sure that the buffer chest is not filled up completely. So I add a wire connection to the incoming belt segment here and set the condition to only enable if there are less than 200 refined concrete in the buffer chest. If I connect it now, the belt will eventually stop once there are more than 200 items in the buffer chest. Let's repeat this for the belt with the holmium and then for the blue chips. Finally, I bring in the steel from the side like this, because it is getting a bit crowded here. But let's not place the last belt just yet, because we want to finish the remaining build first. Now let's handle the items for the other qualities. As usual, we need to add buffer chests here due to the probabilistic nature of the recycling process. Then we can copy the splitter configuration 4 times. Since we have set the quality filter to any, we don't need to adjust them again. We only need to specify the general quality of items to be filtered to the left. Green quality goes here, blue quality here, and purple quality here. All remaining legendary items will then automatically go here. And now we can think about the legendary items for a bit. Do we really want to use them to produce EMPs? Remember what we learned in the last video, only 34% of legendary items were produced from legendary input materials. The other 66% of legendary items were gambled up by the lower quality production machines. So if we keep the legendary materials, we only lose a third of our production, but we gain a lot of legendary holmium, steel, blue chips and refined concrete for other purposes. Therefore, at least in my opinion, all these legendaries are a bit too valuable to be wasted on EMPs right away. But I might still occasionally want to produce them if I desperately need some, at least in the beginning. So let's compromise. I will sort all these legendary items into yellow storage chests to make them available for export. I add a constant combinator above and add a bell signal with a value of 1, but disable the combinator. Then I connect the combinator with the 4 input inserters and set their conditions to enable when the bell signal is equal to 1. Now I can enable the constant combinator to manually trigger production whenever needed. How exactly you handle these legendary items is completely up to you. I recommend to occasionally pick them up with a planetary supply ship and bring them to wherever you need them. Now it's time to connect the last missing belt for the steel input and see if everything works as intended. We can see that the 4 different inputs are being sorted and buffered and our first EMPs are being produced. Now let's talk about the production rate. As mentioned earlier, it heavily depends on the general production capability of your Fulgora base. We would need 22.5 holmium plates per second and 7.5 of everything else. If we factor in what we get back from recycling, we would still need roughly 18 holmium plates and 6 of everything else per second. So what do you think the long-term bottleneck will be? Right, it's the blue chips, at least in my experience. For the 18 holmium plates, you only need approximately 3 holmium ore, if you use at least tier 3 productivity modules and a foundry. This can be reduced much further once you gain access to legendary production modules. But blue chips are not only required for launching rockets into orbit, you also need to recycle a lot of them for green circuits if you want to keep your science production running. So it might be a good idea to occasionally drop a few thousand blue chips onto Fulgora from your interplanetary supply ship. This can boost your legendary EMP production. But if we were able to keep this design running non-stop, we can use our rule of thumb to estimate the rate of production. We would produce 13.5 normal quality EMPs per minute. This would equate to roughly 13.5 legendary EMPs per hour. But since we want to keep the legendary ingredients, we give up on 1/3 of production. We would instead get between 8 and 9 legendary EMPs per hour, plus an additional 500 legendary holmium plates and 160 of everything else. To be honest, these numbers are quite low. This is one of the reasons to focus on this Megabase transition step right now. This design should start running as soon as possible to slowly accumulate legendary EMPs over time. On a side note, let's take a look at one of my playthroughs. Here's the same build in one of my recent Megabases. It is currently idle, because there are more than 100 legendary EMPs already in stock, and even in a Megabase you will only need a finite amount of those. And as you can see over here, I have only produced 36 legendary EMPs directly from legendary ingredients, and only at the very beginning. Instead, I exported tens of thousands of legendary holmium plates, as well as most of the other materials. To give you an idea of the numbers, this first machine for normal quality alone produced almost 40,000 EMPs. But now let's continue with our last goal for this episode: improve the quality module gambler back on Nauvis. For this, we need to wait for our first 6 legendary EMPs and bring them with us back to Nauvis. Legendary EMPs have 2.5 times the speed of normal quality ones, which means that we can replace this row of 12 normal quality EMPs with a much shorter row of just 5 legendary ones. This also frees up 35 of our precious legendary quality modules. Additionally, we can replace these 2 machines for green quality with 1 legendary machine, which is also more than fast enough. This frees up an additional 5 modules. In total, we reclaimed 40 legendary quality modules, while still improving the overall production rate of this design by 4%. What we should do next with these modules? I'll show you next time. You can find the blueprint for the Fulgora design in the video description. If you like this content, please leave a like and hit subscribe. Thanks and bye.